When I first met Emily, it felt like fate. We were both at a mutual friend's dinner party, and I remember the way her laugh caught my attention across the room. She had this magnetic energy about her, kind, intelligent, and effortlessly beautiful. We clicked instantly. By the end of the evening, I already knew I wanted to see her again. She wasn't just someone I wanted to date. She was someone I wanted to build a life with. Emily had a way of making everything feel lighter. Her quick wit and warm smile made me believe I was the luckiest man in the world. She wasn't like the other women I had dated before. Emily was driven, compassionate, and fiercely loyal to the people she cared about. She was the kind of person who'd drop everything to help a friend in need, no matter the inconvenience. At the time, I admired that about her. When we started dating, it was like living in a dream. We would spend hours talking about everything: our favorite books, our childhood memories, our dreams for the future. She told me about her lifelong friendship with Adam, a man she had known since college. "He's like the brother I never had," she had said with a laugh. "You'll love him." And at the time, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had never given me a reason to doubt her. Over the next 3 years, our relationship grew stronger. We celebrated milestones together: promotions, birthdays, holidays. I felt like I had finally found someone who truly understood me. When I proposed to her during a trip to the mountains, her face lit up, and she said yes without hesitation. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Our wedding was everything we had dreamed of. It was a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by family and friends. I can still remember the way she looked walking down the aisle, her eyes brimming with tears of joy. In that moment, I thought I had found my forever. We exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of our lives. I believed every word, and I thought she did too. The first year of our marriage was blissful. We moved into a cozy home in the suburbs and began building our life together. I would wake up every morning grateful to have her by my side. We would spend our weekends exploring the city, trying out new restaurants, and dreaming about our future. We talked about starting a family someday, and I couldn't wait to see Emily as a mother. She had this nurturing quality about her that made me believe she would be incredible with kids. But then, slowly, things began to change. It wasn't something I noticed right away. At first, it was subtle, little things that didn't seem significant at the time. Emily started spending more time with Adam, her best friend from college. I didn't think much of it. After all, they had been close for years, and I trusted her. She would often tell me stories about their friendship, about how he had been there for her during tough times. I didn't want to be the insecure husband who couldn't handle his wife having male friends, so I brushed off any unease I felt. But as time went on, Adam's presence in our lives became more pronounced. He would call her late at night, needing advice or someone to talk to. Emily would drop whatever she was doing to answer, even if we were in the middle of dinner or watching a movie. At first, I told myself it was harmless. She was just being a good friend. But there was something about the way her face would light up when she talked to him that I couldn't ignore. The first time I met Adam, he seemed nice enough. He was charming, with an easygoing demeanor that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. But there was something about him that made me uneasy. It wasn't anything he said or did. It was just a feeling, like he was always one step ahead of everyone else in the room. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself I was overthinking it. As the months went on, I began to notice more red flags. Emily would often prioritize Adam over our plans. If he needed her, she would cancel date nights or reschedule events without hesitation. When I brought it up to her, she would laugh and say, "You're being ridiculous. Adam is like family to me." She always had a way of making me feel like I was overreacting, and I didn't want to come across as controlling, so I let it go. Looking back, I realized that was my first mistake. I should have trusted my instincts. But at the time, I was too blinded by my love for Emily to see what was happening right in front of me. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch, Emily received a text from Adam. Her face lit up as she read it, and she quickly typed a response, her fingers flying across the screen. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the movie we were watching, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I asked her what the text was about, she brushed it off, saying, "Oh, it's just Adam being Adam. He had a rough day at work. I wanted to believe her, but the unease in my chest wouldn't go away. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder, was I losing my wife to her best friend? The cracks in our marriage began to widen, but it wasn't an overnight revelation. It was gradual, like a slow drip that eventually becomes a flood. Emily's bond with Adam, which I had initially brushed off as a harmless friendship, started to feel like an uninvited guest in our home. Always present, always looming. I still remember the first time I felt the sting of inadequacy in our relationship. It wasn't because of an argument or a harsh word from Emily. It was her silence. We were at dinner one evening, seated at our favorite Italian restaurant, the one we'd frequented since our dating days. But instead of enjoying the moment, Emily was glued to her phone, her lips curving into a small smile every few seconds. When I asked her what was so amusing, she casually said, "Oh, Adam just sent a funny meme. You know how he is." Her nonchalance cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't the meme. It was the fact that she seemed more invested in her conversation with Adam than in the time we were supposed to be sharing. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I was overreacting. But the pattern repeated itself. Texts, calls, and inside jokes I wasn't a part of began to dominate her attention. At first, I kept my frustrations to myself. I told myself that Emily and Adam had been friends long before I came into the picture, and it wasn't fair for me to be jealous. But the small, subtle shifts in Emily's behavior were impossible to ignore. She started to compare me to Adam in casual conversations. Adam says this. Adam thinks that. Adam would have done it this way. It wasn't outright criticism, but it felt like I was constantly being measured against her best friend and found lacking. One weekend, I suggested we take a trip to the mountains, a getaway we had talked about for months but never managed to plan. Emily seemed hesitant. "I'll have to check with Adam," she said without thinking, her words cutting through me like a knife. When I asked why she needed to consult Adam, she backtracked, claiming she had promised to help him with something that weekend. It wasn't the first time our plans had taken a back seat to Adam's needs. I decided to bring it up one night as we lay in bed. The glow from her phone illuminated her face as she scrolled through messages. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice steady, "do you think you're spending too much time with Adam?" Her brow furrowed, and she looked at me like I had just accused her of a crime. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone defensive. "Adam's my best friend. He's always been there for me." "I'm not saying you shouldn't be friends," I replied carefully, "but it feels like he's becoming more important to you than our marriage." Emily sighed, putting her phone down. "That's ridiculous. Adam and I have always been close. You knew that when we got married. Why are you bringing this up now?" "Because it feels like I'm competing with him," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly, "and I don't think I'm winning." Instead of reassuring me, Emily rolled her eyes. "You're being insecure. Adam is like a brother to me. There's nothing to worry about." Her dismissal stung more than I expected. I wasn't trying to control her or demand she end her friendship. I just wanted her to acknowledge how I felt. But instead of addressing my concerns, she brushed them aside, leaving me feeling like my emotions were invalid. The friction between us continued to grow. Small disagreements turned into full-blown arguments, most of them revolving around Adam. I began to feel like an outsider in my own marriage, constantly on edge, wondering when the next text or call from Adam would interrupt our time together. It wasn't just the frequency of their interactions, it was the intimacy. They shared a bond that I wasn't a part of, and it felt like there was no room for me in their dynamic. One evening, I came home from work to find Emily and Adam in our living room, laughing over something on her laptop. They looked so comfortable, so at ease, that for a moment, I felt like I was intruding. When Emily saw me, she smiled and said, "You're home early. Adam and I were just going over some old college photos." I forced a smile, but inside, I felt like screaming. I had no issue with Emily having friends, but Adam wasn't just a friend. He was an ever-present shadow in our marriage, a reminder that I wasn't enough. I didn't want to confront her again and risk another argument. So I swallowed my feelings and tried to act normal. But the weight of my unspoken frustrations was starting to suffocate me. As the days turned into weeks, the distance between Emily and me grew. We still shared the same bed, but it felt like we were living separate lives. She was always preoccupied with Adam, whether it was helping him with a project, listening to his problems, or simply hanging out. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces of our relationship, trying desperately to hold on to something that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I started to wonder if I was imagining things, if I was letting my insecurities cloud my judgment. But deep down, I knew the truth. Emily's relationship with Adam wasn't just a friendship, it was something more. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her. It's strange how you start to notice the smallest shifts in someone you love. At first, it's subtle. Things you tell yourself are inconsequential. But eventually, those little shifts form a pattern you can't ignore. With Emily, the changes began to pile up like forgotten bills, small enough to overlook until they threatened to overwhelm me. Emily's late nights with Adam started becoming a regular occurrence. Initially, I believed her when she said they were working on something important for his career. But then the excuses started to sound hollow. We're brainstorming for his pitch turned into, he needed to talk about some personal stuff. She wasn't just spending time with Adam. She was prioritizing him. And I was always the afterthought. One night, I suggested we go out for dinner. It had been weeks since we'd had a proper date night, and I thought it might be a chance to reconnect. Emily agreed, but her enthusiasm felt forced, like she was doing it out of obligation. As we sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant, one of our favorite spots, the conversation felt stilted. I tried asking about her day, but her answers were clipped, distracted. At one point, her phone buzzed, and her face lit up. It was Adam. She glanced at me, muttered an apology, and began typing furiously. I waited, my food growing cold as she chuckled softly at whatever he had sent. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, it's just Adam," she said with a smile. "He's so ridiculous sometimes." I wanted to ask her to put the phone away, to focus on us for once. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, wondering when I had become second place in my own marriage. The more I observed, the more apparent it became that Emily's behavior was changing in ways I couldn't ignore. She started dressing differently, clothes I hadn't seen her wear before, more form-fitting, more polished. "It's for work," she explained when I asked about her sudden interest in fashion. But I noticed she didn't dress like that when we went out. It was always when she was meeting Adam. She also started talking about him constantly. "Adam said this. Adam thinks that. Adam is so good at handling stress." It was like every conversation we had revolved around him. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, that she was just being supportive of her friend. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. One evening, I came home from work to find Emily on a video call with Adam. She was laughing, her head tilted in that way she did when she was truly enjoying herself. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She hadn't noticed me yet. When she finally did, she quickly ended the call. "You're home early," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and guilt. "Didn't mean to interrupt," I said, forcing a smile. "What were you two talking about?" "Just some work stuff," she replied, avoiding my gaze. "He's going through a lot right now." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that my wife wasn't lying to me. But the unease in my gut was hard to ignore. It wasn't just the late nights or the secretive conversations. It was the way she lit up when she talked about Adam, a light I hadn't seen in her eyes when she looked at me in a long time. As the days passed, I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. Emily was physically present, but emotionally, she was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach her. I tried to initiate conversations, to bring up my concerns gently, but she always brushed them off. "You're overthinking things," she'd say. "Adam's just a friend. But friends don't make you feel invisible. Friends don't create a wedge between a husband and wife." One night, as we lay in bed, I decided to confront her directly. "Emily," I began, my voice hesitant, "do you think we're okay?" She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I mean us," I said, searching her face for any sign of recognition. "It feels like we're drifting apart, like you're more focused on Adam than on our marriage." Her lips tightened, and she let out a sigh. "Alex, I've told you before, Adam and I are just friends. He's been in my life for years. You knew that when we got married. I know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But it feels different now. You spend more time with him than you do with me. It's like, I don't know. It's like I'm losing you. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, her silence speaking volumes. Finally, she said, "You're not losing me. You're being paranoid." Paranoid. The word stung. Was I being paranoid? Was I imagining things? I wanted to believe her, to trust that my fears were unfounded. But the nagging feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. Over the next few weeks, I tried to push the doubts aside. I focused on work, on hobbies, on anything that would distract me from the growing chasm between us. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Emily was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The tension in our home had reached a boiling point. Every interaction with Emily felt strained, like we were walking on thin ice, both aware of the cracks but unwilling to address them directly. I kept trying to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the bond between Emily and Adam was nothing more than a deep friendship. But deep down, I knew better. The distance between us had grown too wide to ignore. One evening, Emily approached me in the living room. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. "Alex," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" I replied, lowering the book I'd been pretending to read. "Adam's going through a really rough time," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "He needs a place to stay for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're asking if Adam can live here?" I asked, incredulous. "In our house." "It's temporary," she insisted, her tone defensive. "He's my best friend, Alex. He doesn't have anyone else." I stared at her, trying to process what she was asking. Our marriage was already strained, and now she wanted to invite the man who was at the center of all my doubts into our home? "Emily," I said slowly, "don't you think that might be inappropriate?" "Inappropriate?" she shot back, her eyes narrowing. "He's my friend. I thought you trusted me." "This isn't about trust," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "It's about boundaries. Inviting another man to live with us, especially him, crosses a line." Her expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable," she snapped. "Adam needs help, and I'm not going to turn my back on him just because you're feeling insecure." Insecure. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt a wave of anger and hurt wash over me. "This isn't about insecurity, Emily," I said, my tone sharp. "It's about respect. Respect for our marriage." But she wasn't listening. She turned on her heel and left the room, leaving me sitting there, seething in silence. I knew this wasn't over. A few days later, I came home from work to find Adam's belongings neatly stacked in our guest room. Emily hadn't even waited for my consent. She had made the decision on her own, disregarding my feelings entirely. Adam greeted me with an overly friendly smile, as if he were oblivious to the tension his presence created. "Thanks for letting me stay here, Alex," he said, extending a hand. I shook it reluctantly, my grip tighter than necessary. "Sure," I replied tersely, forcing a smile. "Make yourself at home." But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like I was a stranger in my own house, a third wheel in my own marriage. Adam's presence was everywhere. At the dinner table, in the living room, even in conversations that once belonged solely to Emily and me. The two of them had their own inside jokes, their own routines, their own world. And I was left on the outside, watching helplessly as my marriage slipped further away. The breaking point came one night when I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I had been heading downstairs for a glass of water when their voices stopped me in my tracks. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," Adam said, his voice low but urgent. "Just give it time," Emily replied. "He'll come around." My heart sank. They weren't just friends. This wasn't just about Adam needing a place to stay. There was something deeper, something I had been too afraid to acknowledge. I backed away silently, my hands trembling as I gripped the banister. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept beside me, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The next morning, I decided to confront her. Over breakfast, I set my coffee mug down with a little more force than necessary, drawing her attention. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. Emily looked up from her plate, her expression guarded. "What about?" "About Adam," I said bluntly. "And about us." Her eyes flickered with annoyance. "What now, Alex?" "I overheard you two talking last night," I said, watching her closely. "What did you mean when you said I'd come around?" Her face flushed, and she looked away. "You misunderstood," she muttered. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been prioritizing Adam over our marriage." She didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she said, "Maybe we do need to talk about our marriage. But not right now. Not right now." Always avoiding, always deflecting. I felt a surge of frustration and despair. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved become a stranger to me? That evening, I found myself sitting alone in the guest room, staring at the evidence of Adam's presence. His clothes, his books, his toiletries neatly arranged on the dresser. This wasn't just about Adam anymore. It was about Emily's complete disregard for our relationship, her unwillingness to see how deeply her actions were hurting me. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the problem. It was time to take a stand, to fight for my marriage, or to face the possibility that it might already be over. The dynamic in the house shifted dramatically once Adam officially moved in. It was no longer just my home with Emily. It became something unrecognizable, a space where I felt like a guest rather than a partner. Every corner of the house echoed with their laughter, their whispered conversations, their shared secrets. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that I was overreacting. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Adam was everywhere. He wasn't just a temporary guest. He was a presence that loomed over everything. He'd casually stroll into the kitchen shirtless in the morning, helping himself to coffee like he owned the place. He'd sit on the couch next to Emily, their heads bent together as they scrolled through his phone, sharing private jokes. I felt like an outsider in my own life, watching them from the periphery, invisible. One night, as I came home late from work, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The door to the guest room was wide open, but the bed was untouched, perfectly made, as though no one had slept there. I walked down the hall to the master bedroom, my heart pounding. Inside, I found Emily and Adam sitting on the bed, talking in hushed tones. The sight stopped me in my tracks. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. Emily looked up, startled. "Alex, calm down," she said, her tone dismissive. He was stressed and needed someone to talk to." "In our bedroom?" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. "This is crossing a line, Emily." She rolled her eyes, as though I was being unreasonable. "You're overreacting. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was a massive, glaring red flag that I couldn't ignore. Adam looked uncomfortable, shifting on the bed like he wanted to disappear. "Maybe I should give you two some space," he muttered, standing up. "Maybe you should," I said, not bothering to hide my frustration. He left the room quickly, leaving me alone with Emily. "Do you even realize how this looks?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. She sighed, exasperated. "Alex, you're blowing this out of proportion. Adam is my best friend. He's going through a hard time, and I'm just trying to be there for him. Why can't you understand that?" "Because it's not just about him," I said, my voice rising. "It's about us. It's about the fact that you've been prioritizing him over me, over our marriage. This isn't what I signed up for, Emily." Her expression hardened. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "Adam needs me right now, and all you can think about is yourself." Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm your husband," I said, my voice breaking. "Does that mean nothing to you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned away, refusing to meet my eyes. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, I realized just how far apart we had grown. This wasn't the woman I married. This was someone else entirely. Over the next few weeks, the situation only got worse. Adam and Emily grew even closer, while I became more and more isolated. I tried to talk to her, to make her see how much this was hurting me, but she always brushed me off. "You're being dramatic," she'd say. "You're imagining things." But I wasn't imagining the way they looked at each other, the way they shared private smiles and inside jokes. I wasn't imagining the late-night whispers I overheard when I walked past the guest room. And I certainly wasn't imagining the growing distance between us, the way she avoided my touch, my questions, my presence. One night, I decided to test my suspicions. I stayed up late, pretending to work in my home office, waiting to see what would happen. Around midnight, I heard the soft creak of the floorboards as Emily tiptoed down the hall. I followed quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. She stopped outside the guest room, knocked softly, and slipped inside. I stood there in the dark, staring at the closed door, my worst fears confirmed. I wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I turned and walked away, feeling more defeated than I ever had in my life. The next morning, I confronted her again. "I know what's going on," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw you go into his room last night." She didn't even try to deny it. "Alex, it's not what you think," she said, her tone defensive. "Adam needed someone to talk to. That's all." "That's all?" I repeated, incredulous. "Do you even hear yourself? You're sharing a room with another man in our house, and you expect me to believe that it's innocent?" She crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said coldly. "If you can't handle my friendship with Adam, that's your problem." Her words were like a dagger to the heart. I realized then that this wasn't just about Adam. It was about Emily's complete disregard for me, for our marriage, for the vows we had taken. I didn't know how much more I could take, but one thing was clear. Something had to change. This couldn't go on. The tension in our house had reached a breaking point. Every time I looked at Emily and Adam, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't focus at work, and I couldn't stop replaying every moment that led to this disaster. I had been patient, understanding, and forgiving, but enough was enough. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how painful. One evening, after another long day of silently enduring their blatant disrespect, I decided it was time. Adam was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he owned the place, while Emily was in the kitchen making tea. I walked in, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "Adam, can we talk?" I said, my voice steady but laced with an edge I couldn't hide. He looked up, startled, then glanced at Emily as if asking for permission. That only fueled my anger further. "Alone," I added, making it clear this wasn't a request. Adam hesitated, but eventually he nodded and stood. I led him into the dining room, shutting the door behind us. For a moment, we stood in silence, the air thick with tension. "What's going on between you and my wife?" I asked bluntly, my eyes boring into his. Adam shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Nothing," he mumbled. "We're just friends." "Friends," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Do you always share a room with your friends? Do you always whisper and laugh like you've got some private joke at someone else's expense?" He looked cornered, his face turning red. "It's not like that, Alex. You're overthinking this." "I'm overthinking?" I snapped, my anger finally spilling over. "You've moved into my house. You're sharing a room with my wife. You're treating this place like it's yours, and you expect me to believe nothing is going on?" Adam opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door swung open. Emily stood there, her face a mix of anger and defiance. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes darting between us. I turned to her, my voice shaking with frustration. "What's going on is that I'm trying to get answers. I'm trying to understand why you think it's okay to treat me like this, to treat our marriage like it means nothing." Emily crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Alex, you're being ridiculous. Adam is my best friend. That's all this is." "Best friend?" I laughed bitterly. "You've completely disregarded our relationship for him. You've crossed every line. And now you're trying to make me feel like I'm the crazy one? Emily glared at me, her voice rising. Maybe if you weren't so insecure, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Adam is here because he needs support, something you clearly don't understand. Her words cut deep, but I refused to back down. This isn't about insecurity, Emily. This is about respect. Respect for me, for our marriage, for the life we built together. And you've shown none of that. Adam, sensing the rising hostility, tried to interject. Maybe I should leave. No, I said firmly, cutting him off. You've already done enough damage. You don't get to walk away from this. You need to understand what you've done. Emily stepped between us, her voice sharp. Alex, stop. This is exactly why I've been pulling away. You're controlling and paranoid, and I can't deal with it anymore. Her words hit me like a freight train. Controlling? I echoed, my voice breaking. I've done nothing but try to support you, to be patient and understanding. And this is how you repay me? She didn't respond, her silence speaking volumes. Adam shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to leave. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating and undeniable. I can't do this anymore, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. If you want to prioritize him over me, then fine. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you destroy everything we've built. Emily's eyes widened, but she quickly masked her shock with defiance. So that's it? You're just going to give up? I'm not giving up, I said, my voice steady. I'm letting go. There's a difference. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. My heart felt heavy, but for the first time in months, I also felt a glimmer of relief. I had stood up for myself. I had drawn a line. And while it hurt to admit that my marriage was crumbling, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. I didn't know where I was going or what the future held, but one thing was clear. I deserved better. And I was finally ready to fight for it. Walking out of that house had been one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it was also the most necessary. I felt a strange mix of liberation and despair as I drove aimlessly through the city streets. Every memory of my marriage played in my head like a film reel, alternating between moments of love and the painful reality of betrayal. I couldn't let this be my life anymore. Something had to change, and it had to start with me. For the next few days, I stayed at a hotel. The silence of the room was deafening, yet it allowed me to think clearly for the first time in months. I replayed the confrontation over and over in my mind, questioning every word, every decision. Had I done the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? But deep down, I knew the answer. There was no saving something that Emily wasn't willing to fight for. One evening, as I stared blankly at the ceiling, I realized that I couldn't keep living in limbo. It wasn't enough to walk away. I needed to take action, to reclaim my life from the chaos Emily and Adam had created. They had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The first step was to seek legal advice. I contacted a lawyer, a recommendation from an old college friend. During our meeting, I laid everything on the table: the marriage, the betrayal, Adam's intrusion, and the emotional toll it had taken on me. The lawyer, a sharp and empathetic woman named Lisa, listened intently, nodding as I spoke. "You have every right to protect yourself," she said firmly when I finished. "But you need to be strategic about this. If you want to move forward, you'll need to gather evidence and make your case ironclad." Her words hit me like a wake-up call. For months, I had been drowning in my emotions, letting them control me. But now, I had a clear path forward. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make sure that when I walked away, it would be on my terms. I began documenting everything: the messages I had seen on Emily's phone, the conversations we had, and even the moments I had overheard between her and Adam. I installed a security camera in the common areas of the house before leaving, not to spy, but to ensure that if anything escalated, I would have proof. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself and ensuring that I could move forward without being dragged down by their actions. The next step was addressing my own well-being. For too long, I had let my health, both mental and physical, fall by the wayside. I signed up for therapy, something I had always dismissed in the past. Sitting in that therapist's office for the first time, I felt exposed and vulnerable, but also hopeful. As I spoke about everything, my marriage, my insecurities, my anger, I realized just how much I had been carrying alone. Your feelings are valid, the therapist said, her voice calm and reassuring. But you need to focus on what's within your control. You can't change Emily or Adam, but you can change how you respond to them. That advice became my mantra. I couldn't force Emily to see the damage she had done. I couldn't make Adam feel the weight of his betrayal, but I could take control of my own narrative and rebuild the life they had tried to dismantle. I started reconnecting with friends and family, people I had unintentionally pushed away during the turmoil of my marriage. Their support was overwhelming. They reminded me of who I was before the pain, of the man who had dreams and passions outside of his relationship. Slowly, I began to find myself again. Emily, of course, didn't make it easy. She called and texted constantly, swinging between apologies and accusations. One minute, she would beg me to come home, claiming that she missed me and wanted to fix things. The next, she would lash out, accusing me of overreacting and making her life difficult. It was exhausting, but I refused to engage. Every time her name lit up on my phone, I reminded myself of the betrayal, of the nights I spent alone while she prioritized Adam. I didn't owe her anything, not my time, not my forgiveness, and certainly not my return. Then there was Adam. He had the audacity to reach out as well, claiming that he never meant to cause trouble and that he hoped we could all move past this. His words were infuriating, a stark reminder of how little he understood or cared about the damage he had caused. I didn't respond. He wasn't worth my energy. As the days turned into weeks, I felt a shift within myself. I was no longer the broken man who had walked out of that house. I was stronger, more determined, and more focused on my own happiness. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I decided to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Emily had made her choices, and now I was making mine. I wasn't going to let her, or Adam, dictate my future any longer. This was my chance to start fresh, to build a life free from betrayal and deceit. And I was ready to take it. The decision to file for divorce set off a chain reaction I couldn't have fully prepared for. The day Emily was served with the papers, I received a barrage of texts and calls. Each message was an attempt to sway me in a different direction. Apologies laced with desperation, promises that she would change, and even veiled threats about how this doesn't have to end badly. I ignored them all. My resolve was unshakable. What I didn't expect was the reaction from her friends and family. Suddenly, I was the villain of the story, the one who had abandoned his wife. Her mother called me, her voice dripping with condescension. "Alex, marriage is about forgiveness. You're being rash. Emily is heartbroken, and you're throwing away years of love for one mistake." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. One mistake? The betrayal was calculated, ongoing, and blatant. But I held my tongue, knowing that arguing would only give them more ammunition. "I appreciate your concern, but this is between Emily and me," I replied, keeping my tone as calm as I could manage. My own family, thankfully, stood by me. My sister, Lauren, was particularly vocal about her support. "You're doing the right thing," she said firmly. "You deserve better than this, and don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Despite the emotional whirlwind, I stayed focused on the practical aspects of the divorce. Lisa, my lawyer, was a rock throughout the process. She made it clear that Emily's behavior would not go unnoticed in court. The evidence I had gathered, the messages, the security footage, and the timeline of events, painted a clear picture of her betrayal. Emily, of course, didn't make things easy. She contested everything, from the division of assets to the terms of the divorce itself. Her demands were absurd. She wanted the house, a significant portion of my savings, and even spousal support. It was laughable, considering her actions had been the catalyst for this entire situation. During one particularly tense meeting, Emily tried to justify her demands. "I put so much into this marriage, Alex. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing." I looked her in the eye, my voice steady but firm. "You made your choices, Emily. You threw this marriage away the moment you prioritized Adam over us. I'm not the one who broke the vows. Her face fell, but only for a moment. She quickly recovered, turning her attention to Lisa and rattling off another list of demands. It was clear she wasn't ready to let go. Not of me, but of the life we had built together. She wanted to cling to the security, the stability, and the image of our marriage, even if she had no intention of honoring what it truly meant. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I started hearing whispers about Emily and Adam's relationship. Their once secret affair was no longer a mystery to their mutual friends and colleagues. Adam's reputation at work had taken a hit, and Emily's social circle had begun to shrink. People were distancing themselves from the drama, unwilling to be associated with the fallout. It was a small, bitter consolation, but it reminded me that their actions had consequences beyond just our marriage. One evening, as I reviewed documents with Lisa, I asked her about the likelihood of winning the case. She looked at me with a confidence that was both reassuring and unwavering. "Alex, you've done everything right. You've been honest, you've gathered the evidence, and you've handled this with dignity. Trust me, the court will see that." Her words gave me hope, but they didn't erase the emotional toll the process was taking. Nights were still difficult, the quietness of my apartment a stark contrast to the life I used to have. I missed the idea of a partnership, of having someone to share my days with. But every time I felt that pang of loneliness, I reminded myself of the reality. The partnership had been a lie, and the person I missed wasn't the person Emily had become. The turning point came during a court hearing when Emily's lawyer tried to paint me as a neglectful husband. They claimed I had been too focused on work, too distant to notice Emily's needs. It was a low blow, but it backfired spectacularly. Lisa presented the evidence of Emily's affair, including the timeline that showed her growing closeness with Adam long before any alleged neglect on my part. The judge's expression made it clear. They weren't buying Emily's narrative. After the hearing, I caught a glimpse of Emily in the hallway. She looked defeated, her usual composure cracking under the weight of everything she had lost. Adam wasn't by her side. I later learned that their relationship had fizzled out under the pressure, leaving Emily more isolated than ever. It was a stark contrast to the woman who had once seemed untouchable, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and vindication. The fallout wasn't just limited to Emily. Her parents, who had initially sided with her, began to distance themselves as well. They realized that her actions had not only destroyed our marriage, but also tarnished their family's reputation. I received a letter from her father, a half-hearted apology that reeked of damage control. I didn't bother responding. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The court had ruled in my favor, granting me the assets I had worked so hard for and ensuring that Emily wouldn't benefit from her betrayal. It wasn't about the money or the possessions. It was about justice, about reclaiming the life she had tried to take from me. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The fallout had been messy, painful, and exhausting, but it had also been necessary. I was finally free to move forward, leaving the wreckage of our marriage behind. After the court ruled in my favor, I thought the storm had passed, but I quickly learned that Emily was not ready to let go of the narrative she had created. Her friends and family launched a full-blown campaign to paint me as the villain. I was the heartless husband who had abandoned his wife, the one who didn't fight for his marriage. The stories they spun about me ranged from mildly exaggerated to outright fabrications, and while I tried to ignore it, the noise was hard to block out. I received a phone call from one of Emily's closest friends, Kara. She wasted no time tearing into me, her words sharp and accusatory. "You think you're some kind of hero, Alex? You just walked away like you're so perfect. Do you even know what Emily's been through?" I didn't lose my temper. I refused to give her that satisfaction. "Kara," I said calmly, "what Emily has been through is a result of her own choices. You can believe whatever you want, but I know the truth, and so does she." The call ended abruptly, but it left a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just Kara. Mutual acquaintances, even people I barely knew, started taking sides. Some sent me messages of support, while others chastised me for not forgiving Emily or not being a bigger person. It It was astounding how quickly people passed judgment without knowing the full story. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the betrayal, or the quiet heartbreak I endured. One evening, I received a letter from Emily's mother, Evelyn. It was filled with flowery language about family, love, and second chances. She implored me to reconsider, writing that marriages are built on forgiveness and that Emily made a mistake, but she's only human. The audacity of her words made me laugh bitterly. Where was this forgiveness rhetoric when Emily was betraying me? Where was the concern for my humanity when I was being disrespected in my own home? Still, Evelyn's letter stung in ways I didn't expect. It brought back memories of happier times when her family had welcomed me as one of their own. It reminded me of the dinners we shared, the holidays spent together, and the warmth I once felt in their presence. But those memories were now tainted, and no amount of flowery language could undo the damage. I debated responding to Evelyn's letter, but ultimately, I decided against it. What was the point? She wasn't looking for the truth. She was looking for a way to preserve her daughter's image and, by extension, her own. I realized then that I didn't owe anyone an explanation. My truth was mine to carry, and I didn't need to justify my choices to people who had already made up their minds. Amidst the noise, there were a few voices of reason. My sister, Lauren, was my anchor during this time. She had no patience for Emily's attempts to rewrite the narrative. "Let them talk," she told me. "You don't owe anyone a damn thing, least of all her friends. They weren't in your shoes, Alex. They didn't see what you saw." Her words gave me strength. For the first time, I started to see the blame game for what it was. A desperate attempt by Emily and her circle to shift the spotlight away from her actions. They couldn't handle the truth, so they tried to distort it. But I wasn't going to let their noise affect my healing. I also found solace in the messages from people who supported me. Old friends, colleagues, even distant relatives reached out to say they admired how I handled the situation. Some shared their own stories of betrayal, telling me that my decision to stand up for myself had inspired them. Those messages reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there were people who saw the truth and respected me for it. As the days turned into weeks, the noise began to fade. Emily's circle moved on to other dramas, and I stopped hearing from her friends and family. The silence was a relief, but it also left me with a lingering sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life. I had loved Emily deeply, and I had wanted to build a future with her. But now, that future was gone, replaced by an uncertain path I had to navigate on my own. Despite the sadness, I felt a growing sense of clarity. I realized that the blame game wasn't about me. It was about them. It was easier for Emily and her supporters to vilify me than to face the uncomfortable truth of her actions. It was easier to call me heartless than to acknowledge her betrayal. And that was their burden to bear, not mine. By the end of this chapter, I found myself letting go of the need to defend myself. I didn't need to fight their words with mine. My actions spoke louder than any accusations they could throw at me. I had chosen to value my self-respect and dignity over a toxic relationship, and that choice was one I would never regret. The blame game had tested my resolve, but it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had reinforced my decision to move forward, leaving behind the noise, the drama, and the people who couldn't see the truth. I was ready for the next chapter of my life, one where I didn't have to justify my worth to anyone. The quiet that followed the chaos of the past months felt surreal, almost deafening at times. For the first time in years, my life wasn't tangled in Emily's drama or her circle's judgmental whispers. I had emerged from the storm battered but standing, and for that, I was grateful. The divorce had been finalized, the ties severed. What remained now was the task of rebuilding, not just my life, but also myself. I moved into a smaller, but comfortable apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I poured my energy into making it a sanctuary, a space where I could heal. I filled it with books I'd always meant to read, hung photos of places I wanted to visit, and even bought a guitar, something I hadn't touched since my college days. It was a small step, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost along the way. Work became another cornerstone of my recovery. I threw myself into projects with a renewed focus, finding solace in the structure and purpose they provided. My colleagues noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," one of them remarked one day. They were right. Without the weight of a toxic relationship dragging me down, I felt like I could breathe again. Therapy also played a significant role in my healing. At first, I had been hesitant, unsure if it was what I needed. But my therapist, Dr. Lang, had a way of guiding me through my thoughts, helping me untangle the mess Emily had left behind. "It's not just about what she did," he told me during one session. "It's about how you let it affect how you see yourself. You need to separate her choices from your worth." That statement stuck with me. For so long, I had equated Emily's betrayal with my own inadequacy, as if her actions were a reflection of my failure as a husband. But slowly, I began to see the truth. Her choices were hers alone. They didn't define me, nor did they diminish my value. As weeks turned into months, I started to rediscover joy in the little things. Morning runs in the park, a good cup of coffee, lazy Sunday afternoons spent reading. They became my anchors. I even reconnected with old friends, people I had distanced myself from during my marriage. They welcomed me back without hesitation, reminding me that I was never truly alone. Emily, meanwhile, had faded into the background of my life. The occasional social media post or whispered update from mutual acquaintances was all I heard about her. From what I gathered, things with Adam hadn't worked out. Their relationship, built on lies and betrayal, had crumbled under the weight of its own toxicity. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly, I felt indifferent. Emily's life was no longer my concern. One day, as I was going through some old boxes, I came across a photo of Emily and me from our honeymoon. We were on a beach, laughing, our arms wrapped around each other. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for what we had become, but for what we had once been. But as I looked closer, I noticed something I hadn't before. In the photo, I was looking at her, but she wasn't looking at me. She was gazing at something, or someone, just out of frame. That realization hit me like a wave. Even in the happiest moments of our marriage, there had been a distance between us, a gap I could never quite bridge. It wasn't just her betrayal that had ended our relationship. It was the absence of a true partnership, a mutual respect and love that should have been the foundation of our life together. I placed the photo back in the box and sealed it shut. It was time to leave the past where it belonged. A year after the divorce, I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean, the wind whipping through my hair. It was a place I had always wanted to visit, a destination that had been on my bucket list for years. As I stood there, taking in the breathtaking view, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. I wasn't the same man I had been a year ago. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it had all shaped me, but it hadn't defined me. I had learned to let go of the things I couldn't control, to value myself in ways I never had before. Most importantly, I had learned that moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about making peace with it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I took a deep breath and smiled. This was my life now, unburdened, unbroken, and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.